The world of anime is one of class and culture. It is the ultimate proof that we live in a society. And do you know what stands atop the peak of this art form? Big ol' anime. There are a ton of characters that seem to agree with me, some of which might agree just a bit too much. And it's these lecherous pervs that we are going to be talking about today. More specifically, what got me thinking about this was two characters that are currently running anime. The first is one of the most unique heroes in Class 1A, Mineta. This character has gotten a notoriously bad name for being a gross pervert who is completely obsessed with women. But that always seemed kind of weird to me because there are so many perverts in anime who are genuinely some of people's favorite characters in the series. So I wanted to take a quick look and see what makes Mineta a flaming garbage pile of memorabilia, while other degenerate deviants are characters that people actually enjoy watching. But before we get into it, if you do enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, and if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at ExcellionYT. Now with that being said, let's start with Mineta. This grapey boy has a fantastic backstory, an interesting personality, and obviously I'm joking, he's fucking terrible. Everything from his slimy voice, especially in the dub, to his stupid face just combined to make this character that really makes you feel like you need a shower every time you notice him on the screen. Which, in my opinion, means that they probably completely missed the mark on how this character archetype is supposed to function. Typically, this is an archetype used for comedic effect. So when a character is designed this way, they're kind of set up to seem so ridiculous and silly that viewers shouldn't be feeling like they're watching something disgusting or gross. However, because of the topic, it's easy for things to go downhill pretty quickly. It's an uncomfortable and awkward subject, so if the awkwardness is done incorrectly, it leaves the viewers feeling nasty instead of laughing as intended, leaving us with characters that feel offensive or cringy or just flat out annoying. And while it's probably true that Mineta was designed to be this cringy pervert, it's pretty hard to argue that he's an enjoyable character. In fact, to me it seems like they're just laying into this trait even harder as time goes on, which just makes him even less likable. Something which you can totally see in the popularity polls, as he placed 18th in the first Japanese poll and has never placed in a poll since in either language. Another modern example, this time on the fan service side of the spectrum, is Tamaki in Fire Force. For those who aren't watching the show, it revolves around a society where people burst into infernals and a group of pyrokinetic firefighters protect the citizens from these infernals. And yeah, she might not be a pervert herself, but she's definitely a controversial character, and that's because she has a unique ability. In addition to her fire powers, which again are the only powers that we've seen in the show, she has one called Lucky Lecher, which makes her stumble into perverted situations for no reason. It doesn't serve the plot in any way, and even in a big fight for the season, it goes off 3 times and really staggers the pace, which I think is actually a perfect example of the difference of how perverts and the fan service that goes along with them are done in anime nowadays as opposed to years past. Modern perverts are very one note. It almost feels like they're adding perversion for perversion's sake, like, oh, One Piece was so successful and Sanji's a walking horn dog, so we probably need one of those too. They're definitely missing the point by a mile, but hopefully you'll see what I mean as we go. And I think Mineta makes a great comparison for Master Roshi, so let's start there. Way back in the 80s, we had our first look at one of the most iconic pervy old men in anime, and when it comes to being a pervert, he's pretty gross. He and Mineta kind of give off the same feeling when they're around women. They're full-on nosebleeders. Even with Roshi, it can get a bit aggressive at times, but there's a big difference in their characters. Roshi might be a gross old man, but he's also a 300-year-old martial arts master who was a mentor for our hero and taught him the Kamehameha. There's some level of personality and history that's involved with his character that offsets this negative attribute of being such a pervert. But just like Dragon Ball as a whole, Roshi kind of acted as a basis for the archetype to build upon, and the whole idea of pervy characters was improved after him. Now, on a similar kind of character note, we have Jiraiya, the pervy sage himself. And while a massive part of his character is his research, there is infinitely more to who he is. In fact, despite being so tied to the title of pervy sage, I think the pervy parts of him are rarely the first thing that come to mind when I think of him. When I think of Jiraiya, I think of him teaching Naruto the Rasengan. I think of him sitting with Minato and being embarrassed to show his student his book, and being absolutely humbled when Minato says that he wants to name his child Naruto. I think of his early years with Orochimaru and Tsunade, and how much he genuinely cared for and loved Tsunade. And of course, I think about his sacrifice and death. Jiraiya is an amazing mentor and grandfatherly figure first, and a pervert second. That's why when people think of their favorite characters in Naruto, he's always pretty high up on the list. His comedic pervy moments come across as comedy because of how well-rounded the rest of his character is. Of course, pervs come in all shapes and sizes, so the next character we're going to take a look at is Sanji from One Piece, who is a much younger character than Jiraiya and Roshi, however he still has the same kind of traits. And luckily we have 2Spooky here, who can not only identify any anime women by their chest alone, but is also a massive One Piece fan.
Thanks for having me, my man. When it comes to Sanji, I would say he's easily one of my favorite perverts in anime, because like Axel has expressed thus far, his perversion is not even close to the only thing that defines him. First and foremost, when it comes to Sanji's perversion, it's not like Sanji only wants to pork every woman he sees. I mean, he basically does. But there's a lot more to it, because he's genuinely chivalrous and respectful when it comes to any woman in general, to the point where I'm pretty confident that he believes women are the superior sex. As no matter who he's up against or what it would cost, he refuses to harm a woman in any fashion, which can really blow up in his face. We've seen a few examples of this throughout the series, most notably with Khalifa, Viola, Pudding, and even in the One Piece Pirate Warrior video games or the crossover game Jump Force, where Sanji can legitimately not attack or do any damage to female characters. It's also interesting to note that Sanji's infatuation with women as a whole can likely be traced back to his two amazing backstories, which also give him a lot more depth as a character in general instead of just being a one-note horndog. Zeph taught him not only how to be a great chef and a gentleman, but also how important it was to respect women no matter what, which Sanji obviously took to heart and helped form him into who he is today. But additionally, with his other backstory, we learned that his mother and sister were legitimately the only people in his entire life who treated him with any form of kindness or respect, while all the men in his life literally tortured him mentally and physically. Even so, after we put all of that aside, there is still so many aspects to what makes Sanji who he is rather than just his love and admiration for women and their figures. He can also be extremely over the top, such as with his blood transfusion incident, or just his time with the Okama Kingdom in general. Additionally, because he has such admiration for women, he naturally also has an extreme distaste for most male characters, especially when they try to get in his way when it comes to any woman in his near vicinity. We've also got his extreme rivalry with Zoro, his status as a master chef, and in general, he's just an excellent combatant within the series. The only other thing I would add that gives Sanji more personality would be just the way he goes about things in general. As a lot of times when it comes to the situations the Straw Hats end up in, Sanji is usually in the background performing some sort of task that can help the crew as a whole, rather than just running in and taking part in the fight at hand. A good example being when he snuck through Eni's lobby and opened up the gates of justice while the rest of the Straw Hats were dealing with the Buster Call, in turn allowing them to escape, showing that there's also a much more intelligent and calculated side to Sanji that plays out in the background. We could keep going on and on, but in conclusion, Sanji is easily one of the most interesting perverts in anime, because although in a lot of ways his obsession with women defines him, he's proven to us he's so much more than just your stereotypical anime pervert.
Thanks, Spooky. And lastly, I want to talk about a character who I think rides this line perfectly. I recently binge-watched the bits of Inuyasha that are on Netflix, and I forgot how much I really love the resident pervert. Yes, the show has a ton of problems. It can be broken down to a furry and a high school girl yelling each other's names on loop, but I think the show has something really strong going for it, and that's the out-of-combat scenes. Don't get me wrong, I love the battles in the show as well, however, the way the characters interact is extremely human and realistic, a feeling that's made much more real when Miroku is introduced. Just the way that he talks to characters like Sango, Kagome, and Inuyasha is really great. There's always this sense of sarcasm that makes him really lovable, and that's in spite of his little habit. For those who have watched the show, you'll probably remember that Miroku asks every girl that he meets if they're willing to have his first child. Which, to me at least, is coming on a little bit strong. But as the story goes on, we find out a little more about his character. More specifically about his curse, the wind tunnel. On his right hand is essentially a black hole that can suck in anything in front of him. However, as time passes and he uses it, the hole expands, and eventually it's destined to swallow him entirely, and likely at a young age. Worse yet is that this curse is passed down to each man in his family ever since the demon Naraku inflicted Miroku's grandfather with it 50 years ago. He even watched his father die of the same thing very early in his life. As such, Miroku's looking to get revenge by killing Naraku and simultaneously ending the curse. However, with his limited time, he wants a son who can take up the task should he fail. While this by no means makes asking random women to give birth to your children any less creepy, it does go a long way to make him more sympathetic and understandable. I could see how someone like Miroku might want an heir to avenge their family. But there are two other things that especially these last three characters also have in common aside from their interesting backstories and eternal horniness. And that's that they're genuinely funny beyond these one-note perverted scenes, and that they make up for their debauchery with being some of the kindest people in their world. Watching Jiraiya and Naruto play pranks on each other is some of the most wholesome shit I've ever seen, and the way that he can get serious to protect the people who are important to him is always something that stood out as being really iconic to his character to me. The eternal pissing contest between Sanji and Zoro, in my opinion, is one of the best running jokes in the series. But Sanji is also willing to risk his life to save his friends, like when he had Nami's body on Punk Hazard, and instead of taking advantage of that, he went to every extent to make sure that she didn't get hurt. And finally, Miroku always made me laugh as he was bargaining with villagers to protect them from non-existent spirits. And then of course he had to justify his behavior to his friends, who were always judging him for it. But when push came to shove, he would take in hundreds of poisonous insects to protect these friends. And as the series continues, you see that while he's still a bit of a pervert, he genuinely grows to love Sango, and at least 90% of the time, it's some real good, wholesome shit. There definitely seems to be a lost art in how these characters are written, and when it's done poorly, like with Mineta and Tamaki, it's extremely apparent. However, this isn't to say that every modern pervert is terrible. I do think it's pretty rare to find one who's as well-rounded and well-written as Jiraiya, Sanji, and Miroku in particular. But that being said, the last character I wanted to talk about is easily one of my favorite characters from the past few years, despite being a bit touchy-feely. And just like Mineta, his series is also back, and this is Meliodas from the 7 Deadly Sins. I think we got a solid 3 minutes into seeing him with Elizabeth together before he was groping her, which to some people might be a lot. Might be coming on strong, I get it. Meliodas is continuously shown to be an amazing leader. He's insanely powerful, and someone who has a phenomenal backstory as well. If you find someone who didn't enjoy watching his trial in the second season, and who wasn't emotionally impacted by it, I can tell you for sure you found a goddamn liar, because that was heartbreaking and beautiful. I think what's most important in writing these characters, and characters in general, is often to have their personalities extend beyond being a single personality trait. Characters whose personalities can be boiled down to 1 or 2 words often fall pretty flat. Listen to these Naruto character descriptions and tell me which you prefer. Is fat. Is horny. Sakura. And spent his life in exile after killing his entire clan to protect his brother and village. It doesn't automatically make the other characters bad, except Sakura, but it's easy to see which character more people would be drawn to. And especially with a character trait as divisive as being a pervert or a fanservice character, it just becomes that much more important to get things right. But that's just my thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear yours. Who are your favorite anime perverts and why? And do you think that modern perverts tend to be a bit more flat, or is this all in my head? Let me know in the comments section down below. And please remember to leave a like if you did enjoy this video. You can also subscribe and ring the bell for more anime content. And of course, a big thank you to 2Spooky for all the help on this video. He makes some of the best content on this site in my opinion, so be sure to check him out. His channel and Twitter will be linked down below. And with all that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and remember to stay excellent.